doesn't mean
No, you said earlier that the papacy was necessary for ecumenical councils. That was your first argument when you got on here.
No.
Yes, it was. That was your first argument.
No.
Yes, it was.
No,
You said Vatican I teaches that ultimately ecumenical councils are the ones confirmed by the Pope.
Well, yes.
Exactly. Thank you.
Right.
What's up?
How's it going?
Good.
I'm so sorry. I was in the replies and I was like getting disappointed. I was like, oh, come on. We got to open up. We got to be an open forum. So I have just 2 points.
Okay.
My first point is just to preface this, I'm coming from the Catholic perspective. Okay. So I'm a Catholic, believe in all the church teaching, all that jazz. And I'm also a gay Catholic who accepts the church teaching. So I live a certain way that is chaste, XYZ, all that stuff. So the from the Catholic perspective, I would say that big disagreement here would be that the origin of the Catholic understanding of the universal and immediate authority of the Pope. The origin or base of it is directly is what we would say is directly from Christ when he gave Peter the keys of the kingdom and gave him the powers of binding and loosing, universally, just specifically to him alone. And then he also gave the power of binding and loosing to all of the apostles together with Peter. Mm-hmm. So the Catholic position would be that we have both the universal and immediate authority of the Pope himself by himself and the successor of Peter. And then we have that same authority when all of the apostles are in communion, those who are in communion with Peter. So that would be like a major difference there. And so when, you have a case of, let's say a bishop of Milan is trying to excommunicate Rome, it just wouldn't work. It would just be illegitimate. And so that's the first point.
Okay, hold on. Before we move on to your second point, can I address that argument?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
So the first point I would say to that is, if that was the case, let's say your argument is the case, and I'm aware of this approach. I used to be a Catholic as well, so I understand the argumentation that's used here.
Confession away, sorry.
That's all right. Don't you think that we would see that manifestation in the first, say, 5, 6, 7, 8 centuries of the church?
Yeah, there's a few texts that I have that point to that, but yeah, you would see that pretty early on.
Well, but what I'm saying is, why would we see things like, for example, in every one of the ecumenical councils, there are canons that the council puts forward that contradict Vatican I's teaching of what the papacy is?
I could say, in response to that, the Catholic position is not that each ecumenical council is not going to change, something that was said previously in another ecumenical council.
Well, hold on. But wait.
And so in Vatican I,
But wait a minute. Don't you believe that ecumenical councils are infallible and magisterial?
I would say that ecumenical councils are magisterial, but ultimately it's subject to the authority of the Pope, like in Vatican I. So, so when you mention in Vatican I, so like in Vatican I specifically, it says that those let there be anathema or XYZ. The people go astray who seek to appeal to ecumenical councils as if they are an authority above the Pope. So that's what that's what Vatican I teaches.
Right.
So ultimately, if you are a Catholic and you believe in, that means that you believe in God, the Father, Holy Spirit, whatever, and you believe in the Church, and the Church, that the magisterium, the head of the magisterial authority on earth is the Pope. So as a Catholic, you would believe that. So if I were to look back at an ecumenical council, and I would think that, this ecumenical council contradicts what the Pope said later in a different ecumenical council, then I'll be like, well, all right, too bad. I'm just going to follow what the Pope says. Basically, that's right. What my position would be.
Yeah, I understand. But what I'm asking is, do you think that in these ecumenical councils at that time, like in, Nicaea 325 or all the way up to Seventh Ecumenical Council 787, do you think that those people in those councils, do you think they had the mindset of Vatican I, or do you think it's something that evolved?
I'm not sure. I don't think. I think a lot of things do evolve. I mean, I'm leaning on the fact that the people are getting to understand a bit more about, the church in relation to ecumenical councils. But just in the beginning of the church, like, we didn't have the setup of ecumenical councils until 100, like some centuries after.
So hold on. So ecumenical councils, all right, so you don't think ecumenical councils are absolutely necessary to the functioning of the church?
I definitely think that they have become necessary to the functioning of the church. But in the beginning of the church, we had the Council of Jerusalem in Acts 15, but that was like centuries before the first ecumenical council.
Right. So how did it? Yeah. So let's say we're existing in the year 300, right? I'm a person in the year 300. There's no ecumenical councils. How do I know where the right church is? Do you think do I just go ask the Pope, or how does it work?
Well, one of the things you would ask the Pope, you would speak to the bishop, a successor of the apostles. We have to acknowledge that the church existed before the first ecumenical council.
I know it existed. I know it existed, but what I'm asking is, how, as if I'm a random person inquiring into Christianity at that time, how do I know where the true church is on your view? Because there's not been an ecumenical council. You would know
through a bishop, through any bishop who's closest to you. You would figure out, okay, who is the bishop, who is the successor of the apostles, and that's what the church did, for that time. That's like if you look at the makeup of the church.
So let's say
they would follow what their local bishop.
So let's say it's 381. We've had one ecumenical council at Nicaea. Let's say it's 381. And I go to the Second Ecumenical Council, and they teach the Trinitarian doctrine that the church accepts. It's presided over by Saint Meletius, and it basically affirms the Cappadocian teaching on the Trinity. If I go to that council and I'm there and I see the bishops present, would that be a good way that I might know to identify the true church?
Oh, well, yeah, definitely.
Oh, really?
So they became necessary. Like they became necessary.
Okay, but wait a minute. So there's a problem in this argument, though, because Constantinople I closed out of communion with Rome. It was presided over by a saint who died out of communion with Rome, and Rome only accepted that council a couple centuries later as ecumenical.
Retroactively.
But you just admitted that I could know by being at that council.
Well, you could know. You could definitely know.
So the papacy isn't necessary to know now, I mean,
you could know where the true church
without
is,
the papacy.
You would say that the council did not go on without being in communion with Rome. Like
I could know the Trinity and the true church without the papacy.
So if you were to have, you have the first ecumenical council. Are you saying that the first ecumenical council, the Bishop of Rome was not involved in it in any way?
Did I say that?
No, I'm just asking. So you would say
what does that have to do with? No, what did I?
No.
I'm talking about the second.
This will address that. So did the Bishop of Rome have anything to do with that council as it was occurring when it opened? Was the Bishop of Rome a part of the council when it opened?
Hold on. Who called the council?
The emperor.
Right.
Emperor Constantine.
And they sent legates, right?
They sent papal legates.
Rome sends legates. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. What does this have to do with my argument from the second council?
No, what it has to do with it is to say that through all things, the Pope was still involved with that council. There was no.
Why are you switching to the? You're switching.
You didn't have the case.
What are you talking? You're talking about Nicaea. I'm talking about Constantinople I in 381.
No, but your argument was the fact that the council can go on without the Bishop of Rome.
It did.
But you did that. That's not what happened.
Yes,
it is.
Bishop
of Rome was involved
from
the
wasn't.
Beginning.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah, he was. I mean, you just said we just had legates, who represented
to Nicaea.
In Nicaea, exactly.
I'm talking about Constantinople I, not Nicaea. I said 381.
I'm sorry, I got confused.
No, you tried to switch it.
I got confused. I didn't try to switch it. I want to admit that I did not try to switch it. I got confused with the cities.
Okay.
But you're saying that in the Council of Constantinople, was the Pope involved in that council?
No, it closed out of communion with him. The saint that presided over it was Saint Melitius. Died out. Let me finish. Died out of communion with Rome, and Rome retroactively accepted Constantinople a couple centuries later.
Well, yes.
But you already admitted that.
How does that contradict what I mentioned?
Because you just admitted that I don't need, because I don't need the papacy to recognize the true council and to recognize the doctrine of the Trinity.
No, that's not what I said. I said I said
you did say that.
You asked if ecumenical councils were necessary to know the one true faith,
right?
And I said that they became necessary.
Okay, and I gave you
that doesn't mean.
No, you said earlier that the papacy was necessary for ecumenical councils. That was your first argument when you got on here. Yes, it was. That was your first argument.
No.
Yes, it was.
No,
You said Vatican I teaches that ultimately ecumenical councils are the ones confirmed by the Pope.
Well, yes.
Exactly. Thank you.
Right, but
exactly.
That doesn't mean that it has to be confirmed by the Pope at the same time as the council happened. He can retroactively acknowledge a council. So if the
but
Pope
you already admitted that you already
about him
you're just coping. You already admitted.
No, I mean it's not a cope.
It is a cope. You already admitted
accepting it. That means that it's not up to him to accept it. That means it wasn't ecumenical until he accepted it. That's just what it means.
No, if you're not going to shut up, I'm going to boot you. Are you going to let me finish?
Okay, I'll go to the next point then.
No, I'm not done with this point.
No.
I'm not done. So you don't want to stay here because this is devastating to you. I asked you, if you don't hush, I'm going to boo you. I asked you if I could know the true church and the true faith at Constantinople I in 381, and you said yes, because it's an ecumenical council. Then you revised all that to say, well, it's not an ecumenical council until the Pope affirms it. But I'm making a different point. Do you think that Constantinople I thought they were doing an ecumenical council?
I'm not sure in my opinion, if that's one of the ecumenical councils, then I think the people involved, whatever they particularly.
Why were they charging forward with this without Rome?
I'm not sure.
So were they heretics and schismatics?
I think those who were outside of communion with Rome.
So they're heretics. So they're heretics and schismatics.
I mean, you wouldn't be a heretic.
So they're heretics. Are they? You just said they are. So you think?
No. I said if you are doing something outside of communion with Rome,
that's them.
Schism.
That's them. That's schism.
Mm-hmm.
So they died in schism. So you think that a schismatic council taught the Trinitarian doctrine for the whole church?
I think that if somebody did the council purposefully in schism, they were in schism.
They died out of communion with Rome. Saint Melitius.
If it was later recognized as true and ecumenical, then it was just ecumenical.
So you get your doctrine from a schismatic council. So you think that schismatics provide you with the Trinitarian doctrine of the church?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
How is that sensible with anything in the Roman Catholic system?
Because the Pope recognizes which councils are ecumenical. That's why it's consistent.
Well, I mean, you're just stating your position, and I'm showing you that it's a nonsense position.
You asked me how it's consistent, and it is. So
it's not consistent because orthodoxy doesn't come from Rome; it comes from schismatics, is what you just admitted. You think the Trinity is an important doctrine? Is the Trinity important doctrine?
If the Pope did not accept
the council, the Trinity an important doctrine?
Yes, it is necessary.
Where did the church derive that doctrine from? What council? What council did they derive the doctrine of the Trinity from?
I don't know which council. Defined that particular.
Dishonesty, because we've just been sitting here talking to. No, dishonesty, because we just went through the council, Constantinople 381.